Before I go out to the car and show you how to do an alignment, I'll just go through some of the problems that you'll face when you are doing the alignment. First thing is that you'll need to be on a flat surface. Now, unfortunately, I've got a shed with a big flat floor, which makes life pretty simple, but if you're not, then you'll need to get all four wheels at exactly the same height above the ground. Have a look online, there are videos showing how you can use a water level to put stuff underneath each of the wheels to get everything at exactly the same height. But if you've got a flat surface, that's going to make life a lot easier. But enough said, what we're going to do is change the camber and the toe on each of the four wheels to get them inside spec. The caster isn't adjustable on these cars, either front or rear. And when we do the alignment, we're going to do the rears first, certainly the rear camber first, and it's easiest the way I do it to do the camber first on the rears and then the front, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the toe on the rears and then the front. For the wheels, and this is the front of the car here, this is the back, the adjustments that we make for the camber, and obviously the camber is the tilt of the wheel, and generally speaking they're going to tilt from the right hand side here, they'd be tilted in a little bit like that, so they're tilted in towards the top. There's an arm at the bottom here with an eccentric bolt that's connected to the chassis, and you loosen that and turn that, and that's going to push that control arm in and out to adjust the camber of the back wheel. And in the same method to adjust the toe, there's one at the back here where the same eccentric style bolt where adjusting that and moving that shaft in and out is going to change where the finger's pointed, and obviously that's going to be on both sides. For the front, for the camber, because they're a McPherson strut, and clearly this doesn't work for, it's not going to be the way to adjust the camber on a, for example, a double wishbone suspension. This is only the McPherson struts on, just the normal cars. I think the GT4 might have double wishbone, which is going to be a little bit different. But enough said that the top of the strut, there are three nuts that you loosen, and you move the top of the strut in and out, which is going to adjust the angle of the wheel. And the toe, as per normal, is via the tie rod. Basically, your steering rack is going to be in there, and there's a little adjusting screw here and a locking nut that changes the length of this, which will adjust the toe. So how do I measure each of these? For the camber, I just used a big tri-square. I put a big meter ruler or bolted to the bottom so it's sitting as flat as possible along the floor of the shed. And for the numbers that we're talking about, because the camber is going to be quite a coarse adjustment relative to the toe is a much smaller number. And so this sort of method is going to be fine for the camber. If you're not on a flat surface, then once you get each of the four wheels at the correct height, then if you just use a level along the tri-square, then it's going to be pretty simple to get that to the right position. And then all we're doing is we are measuring the distance between the edge of the rim here relative to the rim here, working out the angles and adjusting that to be the correct amount. For the toe, and this is all four wheels, this isn't the car, these are actually string lines. And what I'm going to do, I've got two bits of timber that have holes in them at each end, and I set those up on jack stands. We build a string, then that's that string line, and it runs just outside the edge of the wheels so it's not touching, and I set those up so they run right through the middle of the hubs of the wheels, and so that they are perfectly parallel. So the distance in there to the hub is exactly the same there, the same between those two, so they're perfectly parallel. And then what I'm going to do is measure the difference between there, and that will tell me what the toe actually is. Pretty standard method of doing a wheel alignment at home. Now, why do I do it like this? I've had so many bad wheel alignments from shops in the past, it's driven me mad, where the things just drive sideways the moment you get it back from them. And this is a tried and true way of getting a really, really accurate alignment. And also for me to take it to a shop and give it to them for the day and then go back and get it is just such a pain. I'd much prefer to get it done right at home. And it's surprisingly accurate. So once you get used to it and you get your kit all set up, it's actually not a very difficult process at all. Also in these cars, when, for example, if you do any work to the rear end, you change some components, or for example, you want to drop the transmission pan on the PDK to change it, you're obliged to do an alignment afterwards. You have to take it to a shop to do that. Again, is pretty inconvenient, so I would prefer not to do that. One of the reasons why you have so many problems is because when you go to a shop, they will strap a tool with lasers, etc., onto the sides of the wheels, which obliges the wheels to be perfectly true for it to work. Sometimes they strap to the rim, the outside of the rim, sometimes they'll strap to the tyre, and as you'll find out, if you lift this wheel and put a tool on here and spin the wheel around, it is not going to be perfectly true. And some of the numbers that we're talking about here are so fine that unless that is exactly right, you just won't get a good alignment, and I'll show you the method that I actually use. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the wheel, I'm going to put something here to measure what they call a run out, which is how much this actually moves in and out as you spin the wheel around, and I'm going to find 2 points that are exactly the same distance away from that tool on either side. So what that tells me is that now it is aligned. If I've got a mark there and a mark there at the 90-degree point, so the horizontal point, that is going to be true reference the hub, and that's the thing that I want to align reference to. I'm going to do that for all 4 wheels. So depending on how out of true your wheels are when you're doing the camber, because the adjustment is so large, if it's a really small difference between the run out of the wheel, then you probably don't need to rotate your wheels round to those marks that are true reference the hub. So they're vertical, so you can measure the camber. You can probably do that with a little bit out, but certainly for the toe, you need to have it so those marks are at those 90-degree positions, so they're horizontal when you're measuring the toe. Otherwise, you'll just get completely erroneous measurements, and I'll demonstrate that to you now. To work out what spec you actually need, it's inside the workshop manual. They're all slightly different depending on the suspension setup, so whether or not it's lowered 0, 10 or 20 millimeters, and also for your wheels, whether they're 18-inch, 19-inch or 20-inch wheels. The car that I'm doing on has got 19-inch wheels, which means from the rim edge to edge where I'm going to measure it is 51 centimeters. For my 20-inch wheels, that is 53 centimeters. And to actually work out, save me doing a whole bunch of trigonometry and mucking around for each of those numbers, there's an old navigation rule that I've used for years. It's called the 1 in 60 rule. And what it means is that if I've got an angle of 1 degree, that it will make a distance here of 1 at a distance here of 60. Now, more accurately, it's 1 in 57. So if I've got an angle of 1 degree here, that right angle triangle is going to be 1 unit there and 57 units there. So if this was 57 centimeters, that is going to be 1 centimeter. If this was a half a degree triangle, this would be 57 centimeters and this would be half a centimeter. If this was a 0.1 degree, that's going to be 0.1 along here and 57 along there. And it works really well up to an angle of about 10 degrees or so. So it's a really useful tool to look at your specs and just use that rather than having to get out your calculator. And for mine, with our 51 centimeter rim edge distance, that 51 on 57 is 90%, or like pretty much smack bang on. So when I work out what this angle needs to be here from the specs, all I need to do is take 90% of that and it's going to give me the correct number. So let's go through some numbers as an example. So for example, the easiest one, the rear camber is 1.5 degrees. And be careful when you're looking at specs, the camber is always going to be for individual wheels, but the toe is going to be written as a total toe, the 2 wheels combined. So for the fronts here, what we need to do when we're doing one at a time is divide it in half. So let's have a look at the rear camber. The rear camber back here is 1.5 degrees. So what that means to me is at a distance of 57 centimeters, this is going to be 1.5 centimeters difference. But my rim is 51, so I'm going to take 90% of that, which equates to 13.5 millimeters. So when I'm measuring the difference here, it needs to be 13.5 millimeters less there than there, if this is the inside of the car, to give me the correct amount of camber. So I'm going to adjust the centric bolt here to achieve that. The front camber is 0.5 degrees, so it's a third as much. So again, 0.5 degree, it's going to be 0.5 of a centimetre here at 50 centimetres, but it's going to be 90% of that, so it's going to be 4.5 millimetres difference. So you can see here, if we've got run out of maybe 0.5 mil or so, this really is not going to make much of a difference. However, for the toe, so the rear toe, now the total is 0.27 of a degree. So if I divide that in half, when I do one wheel at a time, that's 0.135 of a degree. So when we do these numbers, so that's going to be, if I divide, that's going to be 0.135 of a centimetre, which is 0.135 centimetres or 1.35 millimetres. Here, take 90% of that, 1.2 millimetres. So when I'm measuring at the rear, the difference in distance between those string lines, when I'm measuring the rear toe, it needs to be 1.2 millimetres further away on this side, because I want them to toe in, compared to the back measurement. So it's not very much. So if I've got a millimetre of run out difference, which is easy to have, then it's going to, I obviously need to find positions that are exactly the same at each end. Even worse is the front toe. The front toe spec 2 combined is 0.03 of a degree. So divide that in half, that's 0.015 degrees. Or when I look at my 1 in 57 rule and 90%, that's 0.135 millimetres difference between there and there, which is 3/5 of nothing. Very difficult to measure that. And as it turns out, you'll find that that is a far smaller number than the run out that you'll get on the wheels. And on my front left wheel here, there was 1.5 millimetres difference as I measured the run out as I spun it around. So you can see that is a far, far larger amount than the amount that we're trying to measure here, which is why it's critical to find 2 points that are exactly the same distance or amount of run out relative to the hub when we're doing that measurement. And you can imagine that when you drive it into the shop and they strap a laser to that rim, clearly with that amount of run out, immediately you're never going to get an accurate reading. So that's why I do it in this way at home, and what I'll show you is how I set up, firstly, the tool to measure what the run out is, which is really simple. Then I set up the set square and then set up the string lines. And the way I'll do this, normally you would do the rear camber, then the rear toe, then the front camber, then the front toe. But what I'm going to do, because I don't want to set up the string lines until after I've got the camber right, I can easily just go rear camber, then front camber, then set up my string lines, and then go rear toe and then front toe, and everything will be fine. You'll have to get some little pads. I'll show you what I've made up that sit underneath the wheel, so these can slide around all over the place and move as required. What I've got is just a couple of pieces of Perspex with some lubricant in between, some dry lubricant, and it works an absolute treat. But I'll show you all of that once we get out to the shed. To check ride height at the rear, if you want to check that the ride height and suspension is and the springs and everything are kind of working on each of the 4 corners, you look at this position here, there are 2 nuts there. Take the center position from the strut brace there, that lower part, and measure to the ground, and that is the indication of the ride height above the rear axle. Ride height for the front, if you look underneath, and you're obviously going to be looking at this underneath the car, you can see there's this little rubber plug here. It's this little platform that sits around that. And if you measure that to the ground, that should be identical to, obviously on both sides, but also to that position I showed you at the rear. To adjust the alignment, each wheel needs to be sitting on something that allows it to move around easily. Normally in a workshop, it's just going to be sitting on a 4-post lift with a platform that can move and turn, etc. So when they make adjustments, the wheel easily moves. Clearly we need something underneath the wheels here to be able to do that. All I use, a couple of pieces of Perspex. I've sprayed the insides with Teflon spray, let it dry, and then put a bunch of graphite in there, and they slide around really nicely. And to give you an idea how well those pads work, obviously the engine's not going at the moment. This is one finger on the steering wheel with very little force, and you can see they turn really easily. And to work out where two even spots are on either side of the rim, I'm just going to set up my little tool, piece of plastic stuck on a box, so it's not going to move, and I'm just going to rotate it around. I'm going to find the high point that's touching that there, and then I'm going to rotate it around, and then I'm just going to try different spots on opposite sides of the rim to find two that are exactly the same. I'm going to use a feeler gauge for that, and then mark those, and that's what I'm going to measure against. A couple of things about being able to rotate these wheels. If you're doing the rear wheels, if you can only lift one wheel at a time, obviously I'm doing this on a lift, which makes things pretty simple, but if you're only lifting one wheel at a time, you'll need to make sure the gearbox is not in park, so that the gearbox can rotate with that single wheel rotating. If you can get both wheels off the ground, then you clearly don't need to do that. But if you've got the limited slip differential, you need to have both wheels off the ground and the gearbox out of park to get the wheels rotating so they both rotate together. If you are doing this one wheel at a time, so you're just lifting one wheel and measuring everything and then putting it back down again, I would suggest not putting it down on the pads that are going to slide around, because clearly you're going to go to the other wheels and lift those and put those down, and you want those to be securely on the ground after you put them on a pad. So I would suggest that when you measure each of the wheels, if you're only doing them one wheel at a time, then put them at 90 degrees like that. You can see my marks there. Put everything on the ground and then roll it back onto the pad, so you don't have the problem of lifting a car where some of the wheels are sitting on that slippery pad. I'm going to move it to the point where our marks are horizontal. Before you start, once it's on the pads, you need to settle everything down on the suspension after you've raised the wheels. People will talk about pushing at on the panels, front and back. I would suggest not doing that. That's a great way to bend panels. What I do is open the door, and the seam along here, which is really strong and lots of leverage, just give it a bit of a wiggle like that, and that'll settle everything down. Alignment adjustments at the rear wheels. There are two adjustments. There's this eccentric bolt here, which is for the toe, and the eccentric bolt here, which is for the camber. We're obviously going to adjust the camber first and then the toe. So we need to loosen the nut on the other side of each of these, and then we're going to rotate this as required, so it's going to move that shaft, that control arm in and out. Same with that one there to do that adjustment. The problem with these are that each of these nuts takes 100 Newton meters on it, and what you need to do is tighten these when the weight is on the car. And the reason for that is there are bushes in here, and you don't want to have load on them like this when you tighten them, because as you put weight on it, now you're going to preload this, which is not what you want. You want it in that neutral position when you tighten it, so there's no loading on the bushing rubbers. So it's difficult to get access to some of these. You just have to have a bit of a play with what you've got in your shed. I found that's what's going to work for me. It's an 18mm socket, and that's just enough to actually fit up inside here. And if I lie on the ground here, I can get myself up inside. And obviously you would loosen these with when it's easy like this, but then once you've done the adjustment, you need to tighten it up there. You'll need to get something to do that as tight as you can, and then lift it and do the tightening to that 100 Newton meters. For the one at the front here, this ratchet ring spanner fits up in here nicely, so I can make that tightening there. And so when we adjust our eccentric bolt here at the back, I've loosened the nut on the other side. This is what's going to happen. couple of things that I've learned doing the rear camber. Firstly, these pads are super slippery. When I loosened everything off, and then if you turn the eccentric bolt a few times around and around just to get all the grit and garbage out of there, so things move really easily. But these wheels just would flop out and just slide under these pads really easily. So I needed to pull in a long way on each side, the bottom of the wheel, and all it wanted to do was flop out the whole time. So I would suggest if you had a second person to be doing the turning of the wrench at the back to adjust it, and the person here measuring, and then once you get the measurement correct, then just quickly go in and tighten it whilst the other person is still holding that position with the eccentric bolt. Other things are using that 18mm, this one here, to tighten that worked really nicely. And whilst I was lying down in here and tightening it initially, then you just shove your hand through the spokes of the wheel and you can put a lot of torque on it, so the bushing is held nicely in place so it doesn't move when you lift it again for final tightening. These adjustments at the back, doing the adjustments, these markings on here are really useful. Now I haven't actually made a mark on the bit on the side, but it'd probably be worthwhile just putting a mark on the side there on that vertical bit, and then the notches as you're rotating that around will be much easier to gauge against it, because I use that a lot to sort of work out, especially when I was doing the fine adjustments. Getting a torque wrench on some of the tightening nuts for the alignment fittings is a bit difficult. The ones back here for the toe at the rear, up in here, once you take the wheel off, you can get on both sides a torque wrench on the inside there pretty easily. For the one here on the right hand side, because the exhaust is there, there's just not enough room to get a torque wrench in there, so I've just used a breaker bar, and using my trusty scales, the luggage scales that I've got with a 30cm lever, that was 33 kilograms. At that 30 centimeters will give me 100 Newton meters. On the other side, in an equivalent position, putting the spanner to the inside, because the exhaust sits another couple of inches further forward, there is just enough room to get your torque wrench on there. Adjusting the front camber, just loosened off the 3 screws to the strut. I'm just using a 3/8 extension bar there, and just gently tap that, and I can move that either way as required. To get access to the tie rod adjuster, which sits up in here, we need to remove this guard out of the way. These get clipped on, there's a clip here and a clip here, but the ends here, which go around the other piece on the other side, has a hook on it, so you need to sort of contract the things together, which is a bit hard. The best way to do it is to push at the top on the plastic and then push on the bottom, and then the two will sort of push together, and then you can get your screwdriver under there and then pull it out like that. And then once they're out, make sure you take notice of all the clips and where they go, because there are loads top and bottom. This thing is held super tightly with a number of different contact points. So, because it's going to get the hell shaken out of it when obviously the car's being driven. So we need to make sure that that gets put on correctly afterwards. Once you've unclipped that air guide, just rotate it up into the wheel well like that, and then push it towards the center. That's going to keep it clear of the wheel, so when we lower the wheel, and if I need to roll it back and forth, it's not going to touch and sort of bind that up. And also it's going to give me easy access. Not going to move this left and right when I'm doing the adjustment to get in here and adjust the toe. And once you get that air guide out of the way, I've just rotated and shoved that there. You can see we've got the components of the tie rod here. This is the bit that goes to the ball joint on the inside of the wheel. We've got the locking nut, which I've loosened already. And this is the bit that we adjust at this end there. So when we turn this, it's going to thread that either in or out of this bit here to lengthen or contract the size of that arm to change the toe. You'll notice that I've marked the positions of these just so I can see what's going on when it's pretty dark and I'm sort of looking under the car. Couple of reasons. Firstly, when I'm tightening this up, because I have to, once I adjust everything correctly and I lock this to that 50 Newton meters, which basically just means pretty tight, because it's pretty hard to get a torque wrench up into here. What I want to ensure is that this doesn't rotate. So I want an indication of this, of the position of this relative to that, so I can see that it's not moving as I tighten this up. Also, I do that because oftentimes after you get the toe correct, you jump on the road and drive it, and the steering wheel is not perfectly straight. What you can do really easily is, instead of having to set up your string lines and do it all again, what you can do is just lift up the wheel, remove the air guide, unlock this on both sides, and turn a number of notches depending on how off your steering wheel is. So you might say, okay, I need to lengthen this one by 2 notches, and because I know the toe's right, then I'm going to contract the other side by 2 notches. And so I can adjust that very simply and then go and test drive and see if I get the wheel straight. So this is the basic setup. As you can see, I've just got the jack stands. There's an equivalent piece of timber at the other end with holes in it that you can see there for different widths of different cars. So I've just set up the 2 bits of string. That's just builder's string, so you can pull that really nice and taut and it's not going to break. I've adjusted the heights of where that timber is, so each string runs right through the middle of the hub. So then I adjust the pieces of timber left and right at the front and the back, so the distance from the hub at the rears and also at the fronts on either side is the same. Note that the fronts and rears are going to be slightly different. As long as both rears are the same and both fronts are the same, that's what you're looking for. It's really important to have a big gap in here, both front and rear, so the longer the distance you have between your bits of timber, the better you are. Because we have to jump in here and start to move stuff, get up and down to measure, etc. And what you don't want to do once you set everything up is accidentally kick things. So you want plenty of room at the front and rear to manoeuvre around. The way I measure the distance to check that the distance on each side is the same is I'm going to pull out these caps. These got little holes in them, put a pick through them and just pull those straight out. That's what they're designed to do. And then to firstly check that I've got it in line with the center line of the wheel, I put my ruler or a screwdriver or something in there on the center line of the hub, then that's going to tell you if you've got that accurately either up or down in the correct position, and then I'm going to measure relative to the hub the distance on each side. Prior to doing the front toe adjustment, you need to lock the steering wheel. Normally in the workshop they'll have some special gadget to lock the steering wheel in place. But all I do is just use some old rags around the steering wheel and the door handles and just a couple of tie down straps to make sure that's nice and tight and it's not going to move. If it moves a couple of millimeters like this, that's fine, but what we don't want to do is have the thing moving when we do the adjustment at the tie rods at the front. Note the normal steering lock isn't going to be sufficient because it's going to move like an inch or 2 at the top, so it's important that it's locked like I've done there. I found the easiest way to adjust the front is to reach through the wheel spokes, trying to do it from underneath the front. You need to have arms which are about 5 feet long, which I don't own. So I found it's actually quite simple, and especially when I put those dots on each of those 6 corners of the shaft that I'm turning, is to just reach through here and look through the top. Not sure if you can, probably can't see that now, but it's pretty easy to look in there, put the spanner on and turn it exactly the amount that you need. And once you've done the first side, go up to the other side and do it, and then come back and check the other side. Hopefully your steering wheel won't have moved, so this shouldn't have moved so long as all your ball joints and bushes and all that sort of stuff are nice and tight, because clearly as we adjust the other side, it's going to be pushing through the steering rack onto the other wheel, and hopefully this will remain the same and you won't have to adjust again. If you have to adjust again, then either the steering wheel is a little bit loose and you need to make sure that's not going to move, or there is some looseness in your front end.